we came across this issue where open data isn't really all that open.
Today I'm joined by a return guest, Mina. This time we're diving into a challenge that almost everyone working with data eventually runs into: open data licenses. What do they actually allow you to do? Where are the pitfalls? And how do you build products while staying compliant?
You can use this data to create a commercial product, whether it's a mapping service, analytical tools, or any sort of geospatial application.
From NASA's satellite imagery to data shared by NGOs and companies, licenses determine whether you can just use the data or whether you can actually build and sell products with it.
NASA says, go at it, you have free domain in this, you can warp it, manipulate it in any way, make money off it. We want you to make money off of it.
And that's where the nuance comes in, because not all open data is created equal. Some licenses are extremely permissive, while others pass obligations down to you if you use or modify them. So today we're breaking down what you need to know about open data licensing with Mina. The future is spatial, so let's get into it. All right, so I am back with Mina, and we had spoken a while back, and today wanted to take on another topic. So yeah, Mina, if you wanted to kind of jump in, I think we want to talk open data and different licenses associated with that. So why don't you give a quick intro on kind of some of the stuff you've been looking at, and then we can take it from there.
Yeah, well, thanks again for having me back on the podcast, Matt. Really happy to be here. The reason why I had reached out to you about this is because and me and my company have been working on creating this geospatial product or products using geospatial data, and we came across this issue where open data isn't really all that open, and so we had to do some deep dives into these Creative Commons licenses and figuring out which ones can we use, which data can we actually input for this set product. I don't really want to talk too much on it because there's an NDA involved, but I figured this would have been a very common issue that most people that want to create a product using open and geospatial data would have to come across. And so I figured it would have been nice to kind of sit down and kind of go through what licenses actually allow you to distribute, modify, and kind of alter their data, and in order for you to make possible revenue off of it.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of the different kind of attributions, and I've worked with it in a number of different ways, from things like base maps, pulling in data to create products from that. If you open up any base map, you're bound to see the little thing in the right corner that adds attribution, and then a few other things that you can kind of use if you're just downloading or reusing data and stuff like that. But there's a few there's many different licenses that you can use, but I think you've gone through and found a few that stand out, at least in terms of, frequency and things like that. So I think it'd be good to walk through those, learn a little bit more about each of those, and then kind of talk about, pros and cons of each. And then if you are kind of starting to use these data sets, what to be aware of as you're starting to approach that problem.
Yeah, let's totally do it. The first one that really comes to mind is, I would say it would be called Open Data Commons, or the Open Database License. And I literally have my spreadsheet up because I can't remember all of it. But what I would classify, or what this means for commercial uses, you can use this data to create a commercial product, whether it's a mapping service, analytical tools, or any sort of geospatial application. You do not have to open source the product unless it modifies or redistributes the actual database that you're working off of. And then obviously you must attribute the original source of where you got it. So whether it was from GitHub or OpenStreetMap or what have you. And you can modify, under this license, you're allowed to modify and share the database, but you must use the same OBDL license. And OBDL is the code for that Open Data Commons license. And so a pro of this would be you kind of have free reign to use with whichever data that you're working with. If you actually modify it, you just want to make sure that you have that written somewhere. You probably might want to link the link to the open data license, so that way a user can come in and they can click on it and say, okay, this was modified using these methods, but the original data source came from here. So that's kind of what I think a pro would be. Con is, from my experience, most of this open data may not be may not be fully fleshed out. So some data might be missing, or it's not fully as expansive as you might want it to be, compared to maybe like, private data services that, are charging for this. They have probably a higher quality standard or higher QA QC assurances, and so those would be kind of my pros and cons for this. Have you come across anything else in terms of pros and cons for working with this open data license or open data commons?
Yeah, I think what you hit on at the end is that there are a lot of data providers that have a certain guarantee of what's coming in, right?
Yeah.
When you're kind of collecting data from a lot of different sources or having people bring that in, there's positives in terms of that you can access a lot of data and people are creating updates, but there are disadvantages because there's no kind of guarantee of, oh, if this thing closes, in the case of a POI, we're
Yeah.
changing it, or if there's an update to naming or anything like that. So you're kind of the pro and the con, I think, in one is that you're at the whim of the folks that are updating that. Now it's worked out great for things like OpenStreetMap and other data sets as well. So you just kind of have to be aware of what you're getting and then kind of understand, okay, is this good enough for my use case, or do I need to go to something deeper, that has a better guarantee on it or something like that. But I think yeah, you kind of hit on it there.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think would require you to be a bit more, uh, to create more space in trying to maintain said database and trying to actually brush up on it and make sure that, if anything changes, that reflects the product or service or whatever project that you're making with that data. And so those would be the only caveats I would, add to that. For the next license, I think would be really great to talk about would be Creative Commons 0. The code for that is CC0. And for this license, and what this means for commercial use, is that this enables scientists, educators, artists, or any other creator and owners of the copyright or database to waive those interests in their works and thereby place them as completely as possible in the public domain, which is really important key metric there, so that others can freely build upon, enhance, and reuse the works for any purposes without restrictions under copyright or database law. And so a really great example of this would be any of the NASA data that is being produced from NASA. And so if, let's say, for example, you wanted to create a commercial application that uses Landsat data or imagery from the Landsat satellite, NASA says, go at it. You have free domain in this. You can warp it, manipulate it in any way, make money off it. We want you to make money off of it. And I believe that is NASA's kind of part of NASA's larger, broader effort to kind of push open science in a free and public domain way. And so I think that would be a really great starting point for anyone who is interested in trying to create something, whether it's content or whether it's an actual product or service or tool. This would be a great license to work under, or at least get the feel of working with these creative licenses. As a part of a con, or I guess a downside, I can't really think of one other than the same ones that I've mentioned previously for Open Data Commons. But do you have anything else to add for that particular license?
It's one of the least restrictive. Like if you kind of want to just like open the doors to let anyone do anything, it's a great license. And I think what's interesting is that you have these institutions, that are creating really good data from lots of different sources. When you think of like satellite imagery and stuff like that, it's anyone producing that at scale, there's a certain amount of like effort that goes into producing and collecting that data, right? From the setup to collecting the data to storing it to launching satellites. I mean, you name it, right? So the fact that that's just available and free for anyone to use, not just use, and when I think of like research or anything like that, but you can actually go create a commercial product from that, and from that data. That's pretty remarkable. And the fact that that's, kind of just out there from these different government agencies and stuff like that. So if you're kind of a creative, a data provider, or you're creating data and you just want it to be used, that's kind of the route to go. So it's a very, very open license when you look at it from that perspective.
No, and it's really fun to work with. And as someone who is actively, working on creating geospatial applications, I think this is a really fun one because now I don't feel the pressure to have to, create all this documentation around, the methodology. I feel that I'll not, someone's not going to come knocking at my door saying, you're going to have this, we're going to sue you for for using this data. So that, gives me a lot of uh, peace of mind, I would say, when working and trying to create this type of stuff. And as I'm working on these, I'm using GitHub and open source code to develop, the applications that we're working on, for my free side projects. And so it's been fun to also try to contribute and also create this license or put this license on my work itself, and share it with the world, saying, hey, I created this from open source. It only feels natural to give back to the community in some way, shape, or capacity. And so I'd say definitely work with these first two that we've mentioned because they're a lot of fun.
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty remarkable that there's, I mean, when you think of like trusted names or like brand names in geospatial, like NASA and Landsat, are nearly at the top,
Yeah,
because I
yeah,
think they're
for
just
sure.
so well known. The data's out there, it's just an amazing source, and the fact that that's just, open for anyone to take and use is like I
Yeah.
said, pretty remarkable.
Yeah, and for how open it is, even if unless you're in the industry itself, you may not even know about it. And so, which is why we're doing this talk right now to kind of spread the the gospel of free and open data.
Yeah.
Um, the next one that I really wanted to mention that caught my eye was Attribution 4.0 International. The code for that is CC-BY 4.0. And for this one is, if there's any data set attached, or if there's any license attached to this data set, it is commercial use is allowed for that data. You can use, modify, distribute the content for any purpose, including commercial applications. But the required caveat here is that you must credit the original creator of specified within that license. And so that includes the author's name, a link to the actual 4.0 license itself, and any relevant disclaimers that the creator of the dataset put within the license. And so let's say, for example, if you created some spatial data set of imagery of cacao farms in Cote d'Ivoire, and you say, this data set can be used for any commercial applications. You just have to credit the farmer and, the region and whatever specific entity that created this data set. And you're good to go. That's all you want is the credit and the link to our original data source, but you're more than welcome to play around with it and manipulate it in any way that you want. A good pro of this would be, I would say, if you are working with a particular entity, they may be a nonprofit, they may be a for-profit company or other kind of NGO. They create some sort of spatial data set. Let's say the Nature Conservancy, for example, any data that they have created, maybe in partnership with Esri or whoever, they say you're more than welcome to use this, the species distribution data however you want. Just make sure that you tag and you put in the Nature Conservancy's name, its license, maybe a few of the partners that also work to collaborate to make this data, and you're free to go. You can have at it and you can distribute it however much you want and create content around it or whatever. Can you think of any cons that might be associated with this data or some kind of setbacks or challenges, Matt? Because as I was reading through it, I was having trouble, like, what's like I don't think there's a con per se, but there's some caveats or asterisks that we'd want to consider when working with this type of license.
Yeah, you would have, there's a few, I wouldn't say cons, but I mean, there's challenges, right? I mean, not even challenges, it's just things you have to do, right? And when you think of you go to a website, or, I think if you used to look at Apple Maps, eventually you could make your way to their like terms of service or attribution section, and they have this like pages and pages of data sources that they collect from. That's kind of where that would end up. Now, how specific you have to be with that can change depending on how you want to distribute that. Is that just you credit them on the data set? What if you're distributing the data set as, kind of, just data over the cloud and people can read that? Does that have to be a
Yeah.
column in your data set that has attributions? Like where do you want to put that to cover, kind of that the requirements of that? Usually it would fall in like a terms of service or a description of the data set that there was, this data is derived from or uses blank. And then you just have to make sure you're crediting that appropriately, and going from there. So it's just keeping that up to date is probably the biggest thing, is that you
Yeah.
would probably need to audit that occasionally to see, terms can change, right? People can change the terms that they've agreed upon. So how does that impact what you're doing, and all those different things, so like I said, probably, like an Apple Maps or Google Maps are probably like one of the biggest ones that collects and uses so much of this information, right? That because they're
Yeah.
collecting it from all over, so they're probably well versed at that. If you're doing this at a smaller scale, or for something that you're building, certainly presents its challenges, but you just have to kind of understand where you need to put that, to what level you need to cite it, and then keep that up to date. So
Yeah. And as someone who never reads the terms or service conditions, I just scroll all the way down, click yes, I read, and then move on with life, because no one has time to read or has the lawyer knowledge to really read and understand the context of which those terms and services are. So definitely need to do my homework on that end. The last one that I wanted to share with you, Matt, was attribution share alike 4.0 international. Longer code, license code is CCBY-SA 4.0. And with this one, commercial use is also allowed under this license. Again, you can modify, distribute the material for any purpose, again, including commercial products. Again, with the required attributions, you want to credit the original creator of the data, which again, link to the source, and then a link to the actual license source. And then any modifications, you can adapt the work and share it publicly. But again, you must license any derivative work or any data sets that you created on top of that original data must also be under that particular license, that you need to share that publicly in that, whether it's in the terms in your terms of service. You got to leave that. I'll leave that up to the creator of the data itself to dictate whether or not, where you'd want to place that within the project or the metadata or something. And then for me, the key takeaway of this license is that you can use this for commercial purposes, but if your business model is relying on proprietary licensing, this license may not be ideal. I can't really think of an example off the top of my head for this one, but I just wanted to just kind of put that out there. Any additional restrictions that I came across with this license was that there are no additional restrictions, like you cannot impose extra legal terms or rights that prevent others from using the material under this license. And so, for example, if you created a subset of that Nature Conservancy data set, for example, you cannot impose any harsher Creative Commons licenses because there's that base license underneath. So that's kind of like the only caveat that I found when reading through this type of documentation. But what are kind of your takes from this license? Have you worked with this type of license before, Matt?
I don't know if I've worked with this one specifically, but it's that concept of like inheritance, that if you create data with this license, you in turn must use the same license. So it's kind of creates this value chain of
Yeah.
derivative data, is kind of the concept that it tries to create, which I think is it can be potentially a great thing. You just need to be aware of it when you're building and kind of creating your data. So if you require a license or something, and that data is a part of that, that's something you may want to look into. And once again, or I guess I didn't say once again, but like this is our interpretation of this, and I feel like as we get deeper into legal terms, like neither of us are lawyers, and this is not binding legal advice. So this is that stage that when you're building a business or a proprietary product, you may want to consult someone to get some advice on that, to figure out, okay, where do my responsibilities sit? What do I need to do? What license do I need to inherit? And just to kind of straighten all that out. Like I said, with some of the very unrestricted licenses that we talked about, you can do quite a bit, but as we start to get in this territory, you need to know what your responsibility is to take that forward, and kind of respect the original author's license, and go from there.
Yeah, and what I would say my key takeaway from kind of going through all of these licenses is that there is nuance between each of them. Both of them might say, two of them might say yes, they're allowed for commercial use, but there are some caveats and restrictions that we want to in place under this license in order for you to use it. And just knowing that there's nuance between these licenses, I think will be a great first step for anyone who is getting their foot in the door and working and having to deal with these types of stuff as they're kind of crossing those bridges along their journey, whether creating geospatial products, tools, or just content in general.
Yeah, and it's a good thing that we have these in place. I mean, and to be clear, these licenses go well beyond the scope of like geospatial data. You can
Very
use
well.
these for any sort of thing that you want to create, right? Which I think is really interesting. So there's lots of implications beyond just the geospatial corner of the world. But what I agree is that understanding where your responsibility sits, understanding the intent of the author of that data or whatever they're creating, and then being able to do that appropriately as you're using these different things, and like you said, across all different domains. If you want to create more derivative open data, what does that look like? If you want to simply create a tutorial and publish it on your blog, what does that look like? And then all the way up to you're creating commercial products from that, what are your responsibilities there? So there's all these different layers. It's a very interesting world. I think it's just what's great about this is that we have choice, which I think is really nice.
Mhm.
And then I think that there is sort of this kind of Creative Commons governing council. That I know they're one type of license, and there's many more once you start getting into some of the Apache type licenses and into
Mhm.
the software licenses and all these different things. But the fact that we are able to kind of have this body that can kind of create these terms, and you get the choice of doing that as a creator or developer or builder of data. I think that's probably the remarkable story here, is that it's just there's so much choice in what you're able to do with this.
Yeah. The last thing I'll add there, what you had said, Matt, was not only does it allows consumers and freely public citizens the choice, but also gives them certainty, because very smart people before us have came along and created these guidelines and infrastructure on how to navigate these types of products, especially in a very digital age that we're living in right now. And certainty is everything, because if you know exactly what is required of you, then you know how to move forward. And I think that is a very profound thing that many of us, including myself, take for granted.
Yeah, it is. And I think just having the I don't want to say, like, I can't think of a better word, but like the trust in that there's these things in place, and
Yes.
that you don't have to go out and create your own terms of service, that you have a choice to draw from.
Yeah.
um I mean, it's a nice thing, and I think it helps actually foster more creativity and use of the state at the end of the day.
Oh, I 100% agree. Yeah, it's very fun knowing that you have something behind your back that you can lean on in order to create something that you find is meaningful.
Yeah. Well, it's always good getting a chance to talk, and I mean, it's interesting to hear, because you've been kind of in the weeds dealing with this, and then thank you for taking the time to share this back out to help others understand it as well. And as that progresses, I'm sure we'll hear more about some of the stuff you're working on as well. But yeah, thanks again for joining. It's always good to get a chance to chat, and yeah, we'll be talking soon again.
Likewise, Matt. Yeah, happy to be on the show and looking forward to the next chat.
Awesome.